have?
I'm James.
All right. Okay, well, today we're going to be talking about our reactions to the preseason testing, which just finished up this weekend. So we've got several things we wanted to cover. Um, I think the beginning that everybody's kind of talking about and everybody's thinking about is Lewis Hamilton testing in the Ferrari. I thought that we'd go ahead and start there. So James, why don't you lead off a little bit with how did you think that his testing went, and what are you hearing? What's the scuttlebutt?
Yeah, first impressions, obviously he's in a new car with a new team, and realistically, he's only been with the team for about a month or so, even though it was announced last year that he would be joining the team. So there's a big discrepancy there that people think, when they heard, like, oh, he's joining Ferrari, he was already in on the conversations. Not true. So, first impressions, he was running different types of programs, and also as well, he was just trying to get a good grip of the car. It's going to be, somewhat different, especially with all the little aero changes that teams are making coming into testing. I think he did just about as good as expected. Even his push laps were really good, and he ended up setting the second fastest time over the 3-day test period, coming right behind Carlos Sainz. So I think that's something to really look forward to. Where the other team's sandbagging, I couldn't really say for sure, but I think he's kind of set the precedent of he's going to be number one at Ferrari, beating out Charles Leclerc, who did come in third for the fastest time. So I think there's a lot of room. I think they really have a good shot at getting the Constructors' Championship this year, having only missed out by a handful of points last year.
Yeah, I've been kind of reading about it, and it's always hard for me to tell. I don't know if I'm just inept at this, but I can't tell if they're sandbagging. I never know. I hear it. It's kind of like one of those things that everybody rumors about. It's hard to say. I don't think anybody goes out there and just goes slow, just blatantly slow. But I would say, yeah, I was pleased with Hamilton's performance, especially the second fastest time. I mean, you never know really whether the fastest time at testing is important or not. I don't know how to even quantify that, but it seems like it means something. It was actually really shocking that Sainz in the Williams took the top time overall, and I was wondering what you thought about that because obviously you're a Williams fan.
Yeah, I did run the numbers back. So Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari last year also set the fastest time of the 2024 testing. But there's a big discrepancy. As an overall aggregate, the cars are running about a second quicker. Uh, just comparing the preseason testing times, since they were at the same track. But for the race, they last year, just kind of as an example, Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari set a fastest time of 129.9, but his race time was 134.5. So about a 4.5 second difference. And then for Max Verstappen, he only set the fourth fastest time with a 137, but he set the fastest time in the race with a 132.6. So are the teams sandbagging? Probably. It looks like the race pace as an overall aggregate is about anywhere from 2 to 3.5 seconds, 4 seconds, 2 to 4 seconds slower than the testing. So, obviously testing is where teams are trying out different parts and trying to get their footing with the new tires that are here this year, which I know that's something you've been reading up on. So maybe you can give me some more insight on how the tires are affecting the teams.
Yeah, the tires is an interesting thing to me. Tires almost seems like one of the single biggest factors in Formula One racing in general. Just every weekend, the track is different, the temperatures are different, the tire strategy has to be different. There's a huge decision that the teams have to make, not only on what tires they're going to start out with, but what are they going to switch to. You hear drivers complaining frequently on the radio about this tire is not good, or this I'm losing front end here, I'm losing rear there. So the tires, to me, that's like a factor that is super important in this sport. So I was kind of reading a little bit about it, and I'm not great with this, but there's 6 different compounds. Now I don't know um, if they just do this during testing where they've got extra compounds, because it seems like during the actual race year they've typically had 3 compounds, and then of course inters and wets for the rain. But so you know obviously you usually got your soft, medium, and hard tires. They've got 6 compounds. So do you know anything about that? Like historically, is there more compounds that Pirelli or whoever's making the tires for the year? Do they usually do a lot more compounds during the testing period, and then eventually phase some of them out and focus on certain ones for the races?
As far as I know, like kind of what's set in pre-testing is what they, or just in testing, is what they use during the season. But the number of tires they use has fluctuated throughout sort of the history of F1. You know, there was a time where Bridgestone and Michelin were the two, and you just had your hard and your soft tires, and that was it. And then it came along with, well, Pirelli is going to make all these compounds, and they're going to have, you know, this many tires. I think there was one time where they did have 6 different tires where you could choose from. They had like a super soft, a soft, an intermediate, and then like a hard, and then a super hard. And you know, last year they only had 3 tires. I think it was. They had the right? They had the softs
Yep.
and the mediums and the hards, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like they've gone back to adding more to it. I don't know how that's going to play out. Maybe they'll just allocate certain ones for certain weekends where you can only run like a soft and a hard, and then the next weekend you can run like a medium and a hard. So it's all to play for. I think it's part of F1 strategy to get racing closer and have, you know, pit stops really become more of a defining factor in how the race is going to turn out since they've taken away the refueling. So it'll be interesting to see how everything comes about. I should mention that the majority of the times set this weekend were on the C3, which I guess is the medium tire.
Yeah.
With the exception of 3 or 4 in there. So we'll see how it plays out during the season.
Yeah, I'll be very curious. I'm hoping that they do this 6 different compound setup, because uh, I like the additional strategizing and drama that it will bring in, where you're seeing what happens with these additional compounds, right? So they do have C1 is the hard, C6 is the softest one, and then there's this range in between. And they kept saying on the broadcast that the 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 C3 was going to be closer, or the C2 medium was going to be closer to the C3, which I assume means that it was going to be softer. So if the medium is now closer on the soft end, it's not going to last as long. And we saw a lot of strategy last year using the medium tire. That to me seemed like the teams using the medium tire as a good balanced tire to get them longer distances. So maybe those tires will not last as long now, and they're going to have to figure out either some races going from a two stop strat, or a 2 stop to a 3 stop, or a 1 stop to a 2 stop, could significantly change things. And I love the idea of having those pit stops. I like watching the pit stops. It's very interesting to me to see who sets those fastest pit stop times. I think they've cracked even with the new heavier tires that they've been using on the current regulations. Like I think, haven't we seen 1 or 2 sub 2 second stops over the last few years?
Yeah, exactly. And going to the pit stops, you know, Sauber's got that new light up system on their tires. I think that, I don't know how important that's really going to be. Um, Maybe it'll shorten their pit stop times. Like once you see the light, you can just stop instead of just like holding the gun there and, you know, waiting until you feel it stop. So we'll see how it's going to play out. Might just be a little gimmicky.
Tell me about it, because I didn't really read anything about the light up system, or anything. I didn't really know anything about it or hear anybody talking about it. What does it do?
So it's sort of this ring around where the lug nut sits, and once you tighten it, to a certain amount, it'll turn green, from what I understand. And then sort of the reverse when you're taking it off. So you'll have a light up system like, okay, the lug's off, now you can move the tire. Which I think those guys that are pulling off the tires, because they're independent of the wheel gun guys, I'm pretty sure they're already putting pressure to take the tire off. It's all sort of one fluid motion. So I don't really know how much of a difference it's really going to make. It's interesting. I think it'll be good, just in case, because we have seen times where, the jack or the gunman thinks he has the tire on, but the lug has disappeared and they don't notice it. And then the drivers lose a tire like right once they get out on track. So I think it's good for that, which is maybe what they're looking for, so they don't have those mistakes. I could see how that could be beneficial, but for making it faster, I'm not really sure it's going to make a difference.
Yeah, it seems like everything happens so quickly that I don't even know how much time you have to pay attention to a light going on. Like that seems like it would slow it down. It also seems like, what are you going to do anyway? Like, I guess maybe the wheel gun guy does his thing and then it doesn't show up green. So they just sit there until they get it figured out or take it back off and put it back on. It's the safest thing to do, I guess. But it doesn't seem like this happens all that often to warrant needing some sort of, fail safe for getting the tire on there. Right. But
yeah, I don't know, maybe and it's very rare that a tire falls off because a lug comes out or it doesn't go on properly. I mean, those things are machined in such a way that you basically can put it on and it'll sort of self-fit onto it, right? So, I don't know. We'll see. I think it's a cool, little extra safety feature. I could see things going wrong if the light system malfunctions and it's not giving you the green light, but you can see everything's fine. I think it could create problems, if there's a fault. But we'll see how it plays out in the season. They weren't particularly fast in preseason testing. So, I don't really know how much there is to play for there.
So, speaking of wheel guns, did you see the little bit of Valtteri out there with a wheel gun? He was walking around with his wheel gun, and the commentators were wondering what he was doing, but it wasn't connected. It was just the gun. It wasn't the whole hose and all that kind of stuff that's usually attached to it. And then they noticed that there was somebody there with a phone. It looked like they were doing some social media post or something, but he was walking around out there with a wheel gun. I thought that was funny. He's kind of cracking me up right now.
Yeah. He's always been kind of like a funny joker guy. And now that he doesn't have the pressure of being a driver, he can sort of be himself and just kind of goof around, which is nice. I think they're going to play him up on the social media portion, which will be fun.
Yeah, he's a good personality. Kind of, not quite as effusive as Daniel Ricciardo was, but that's another thing I thought was a shame with Ricciardo leaving, is I feel like somebody's got to fill that void of the jolly dude that everybody likes on the grid.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, so we've talked a lot about some specific things going on in testing, but I did kind of want to just talk about some almost rookie type things with testing. Rookie meaning as a fan. So, some of the stuff that I'm still curious about, I'm still learning about, is the strategies during testing. Some of the commentary that I have been listening to over the past few days, they've really emphasized that testing is not practice, right? So it's not like FP1 or FP2 at a Grand Prix weekend. They're not doing the same kinds of things. They're really just trying to gain familiarity with the vehicle itself, with the car. I understand. So they bring one car to testing. There's two drivers, and they have to split time with the car. They can't both be out there at the same time. So that's kind of interesting for people that are sort of new like me. I didn't know that until this year. I never really paid attention to that. And then I assume that they're doing some testing in different kinds of situations. So, talk to me a little bit about, if you know, are they going out there and they doing stuff like, how does the car handle, on a single lap? to simulate qualifying versus doing long runs to simulate a race? Do they do some of that? And then uh, what about like, are they going out there and testing the car for a whole complete lap, or are they testing it for, let's go to a high speed corner or low speed corner, medium speed corner, and test it there? Let's see how it does on the straight. Are they doing any and all of those things? Is that sort of how you understand these strategies for these different teams?
Yeah, there's different things they do. They have a day session and a night session so they can run in different temperatures. And then something I don't think people realize is that when it comes to the aerodynamics of the car, you know, how much time you have in the wind tunnel is determined by where you finished in the season. So if you finished at the lower end, you get more time in the wind tunnel. And then inversely, if you finish at the top, you have less time in the wind tunnel. So you can't really tell how everything's going to work out until you get on the track. Plus, there's other factors like wind, other cars, different gradients. There's on Bahrain in particular, there's a sort of a back downhill area. So that also plays a factor as well with the hard left. And then also handling the tight turns. And you'll see a lot of cars come out with these sort of rakes all around the car with the high vis fluid that's also on there as well. So they can really see how things are moving on the car. And as well, what they want to try different programs. They want to test out these tires in different conditions. And, the drivers are getting a feel and seeing what's new and what's not. And, where can this be improved? Or I don't like this, I don't like that. So it's really just running everything you can imagine to get the most data as possible.
So speaking of conditions, I heard a lot about the conditions in Bahrain, which uh, um, you would think it's hot and dry, and it rained a little bit. It was supposedly cold, uh, at least a couple of the days, like sort of unseasonably cold. I heard it was like 9 degrees or something like that, centigrade. Uh, do you think that um, is good for the teams? I actually think it's kind of good for the teams to have different conditions appear during testing, so that they're actually getting this, because the conditions all across the calendar are going to be different. They're going to be changing. They're going to be unexpected. And in this case, the rain, the wind evidently changed quite a bit. One day it was really windy, and one day it wasn't. So, what are your thoughts about that? Or do you think those conditions that were sort of unexpected in Sakir were beneficial to the teams, or did it set them back because they weren't ready for it?
I could see like if, they have certain things they want to accomplish in a certain day at a certain time and then the conditions change, I could see how that could sort of throw a wrench, but I'm pretty sure the teams are pretty good at adapting. I don't really know how much it's going to help or affect them when they go down to Australia in a couple weeks time
Yeah.
here because, the northern hemisphere is still in winter and then the southern hemisphere is of course in summer. So
Right.
we'll
That's true.
so we'll see how it all plays out. Australia is always a first great race. It's where people can really start to stretch their legs and show what the team has done so far. And then things are going to change rapidly. The race is really different because all the cars are bunched up and wind and aero and temperatures are different. And so they're going to get different data. So everything we have right now is really just a placeholder going in.
Yeah. I was very interested about how these conditions seem to affect things, and obviously testing is just it's sort of a different animal, I guess. Like I said before, it's not practice. We don't really learn a lot from testing in certain ways. Like I think it's sort of difficult to take anything from the testing and go, you know, this team is going to be the fastest this year. I do think that a lot of what I was reading seems to indicate that McLaren did not make any steps back, that everything from their tests seemed to indicate that they're sort of picking up where they left off. So I think last week we talked about some predictions, and I was just reinforced there that I think McLaren's going to be the ones to beat for the constructors. Um, but anyway, yeah, talk to me about your thoughts on on testing and what you get from it, whether you think it's do you get anything that leads to greater predictability for the season from the testing? Like, Williams taking the fastest lap. What does that mean? Anything or
I honestly don't think so. They were ending the season last year up in the middle. At least Alex was. So, I think Sainz can really stretch his legs here. He's set the fastest time 2 years in a row. But, even though he set it the fastest time in Ferrari weren't exactly the fastest guys out of the gate when it came to the first race last year. So I'm getting the feeling it's going to be something similar. I think, you know, McLaren and Ferrari and who else there? Red Bull. I think they're going to kind of jump towards the top, particularly McLaren. I think McLaren's really going to jump up. I really get the feeling they were sandbagging
yeah?
for these past few days. So it's really hard to predict.
There was a kind of a funny quote that I heard from Oscar Piastri where he was being asked about testing and the analogy of a Christmas present came up where they were asked, like, is it like when you get the new car, is it like opening your Christmas present? And the analogy went on for quite some time, but the funniest part of it to me was he mentioned it's like you get this Christmas present and then everybody you start to play with it and then everybody just wants a bunch of measurements about your Christmas present, so you don't really get to enjoy it for for a couple of days. So I thought that was kind of a funny quote. I was just imagining, a kid who opens up this toy or whatever, and then their parents are wanting to know what, all kinds of measurements about this stupid toy, so he doesn't get to play with it. Anyway, that was kind of funny. So here's a thing you could maybe help me understand. I wondered. I'm not really good with a lot of the technical aspects of the car. I have like this cursory, shallow knowledge of the setups for the car. And so a couple things I'm thinking. So with the car, there's all these different things they can tweak to make it run a certain way. There's the aerodynamics, of course, which might be the single biggest factor in the speed of the car and how it handles. You've got the suspension though too. A tight suspension versus a loose suspension. You've got your downforce, which I would think they can mess around with that. It's sort of related to the aero, I guess. Evidently, these cars, the way that they're designed, um, the current regulations, the floor helps kind of suck the car down as they drive, so that it's getting maximum grip. And then of course there's the tires. So you've got those are the kind of the four things. Am I, first of all, before we get into anything else, am I missing anything else about the setup? The aero, the suspension, the downforce, and the grip.
Yeah, there's also other like little things that they can play with. For example, they can sort of shift the balance in the car depending on where they place it. So I would say balance would be a good one to add in there.
So what do you tweak with to change a balance? Is it
It's a lot of suspension, but then they have sort of weights, more or less, that they can sort of place within the car. So you can kind of move the weight forward or move the weight back a little bit. And by moving back, I'm talking about maybe an inch at a time, less than an inch, because every little centimeter is going to change the balance of the car.
so they so okay, so the balance, so aero, suspension, downforce, grip, and the balance. You some of the stuff that you see with regard to the aero and the downforce, I think would be like the bigger versus smaller rear wings, the front wing. Uh, is there anything else that sort of they can modify to to affect that aero? What else do they do?
Everything on the car is designed with aero in mind, right? I think it was, um, for instance, Williams, right? They sort of changed their suspension from pull rods to push rods in the back. At least I think that's how it is. I don't think I'm getting those mixed up. I think that's accurate. But that's more of an aerodynamic thing, right? And then there's several other cars that have switched from, doing the push rods to the pull rods in the front suspension. And that's also an aerodynamic. But even if you look around sort of like the mirrors, there's little winglets on the mirrors, which are all designed to help move air around the car and redirect it somewhere else that they want. So every little piece is with that in mind. And I think with Adrian Newey going to Aston Martin, I think we talked about it kind of briefly last time, where the halo meets the chassis of the car. There's little inlets right there, sort of the pioneers to do that and kind of see what changes it'll make.
Yeah, I'll be curious if they keep that for the actual racing. Um, Here's a question about that. So I did see that, and like they've got these little inlets. Nobody quite knew, if I remember right, what those inlets might be cooling or doing there on the Halo. Did I wonder if that affects the integrity of the Halo? I mean, that Halo is a critical piece of safety, for the driver's head.
Yeah.
So I wonder
From
if
what I
that.
understand, it is cooling. What specifically it's cooling, I couldn't say. Um, but Adrian Newey
Yeah,
knows what he's doing, so I'm not too
sure.
particularly worried about it.
On a side note about Adrian Newey, I was listening to somebody, and I think it was Laura Winter who was talking about, or no, it was Ruth Buscom that was talking about they're basically raving about Adrian Newey, and she was talking about this. I don't remember if it was when he left from Red Bull, uh, and she said he got an 8-minute standing ovation when he was introduced at this like farewell meeting or whatever it was. And I thought, I don't think I can't see anybody getting an 8 minute, like that's so awkward to stand there for 8 minutes. And then I think she might have eventually admitted that she was exaggerating. But
Probably felt like eight
that was
minutes
funny.
though, right?
Yeah. Well, like 45 seconds could feel like 8 minutes if you're standing there just clapping for a guy. But anyway, he's very beloved, not just an amazing, engineer or whatever, but like people really like him. He knows how to lead and direct people. So anyway, just that was a little side note. So here's a question that I kind of had, is just more of a this is more of a theoretical what if sort of thing. It and part of this comes from just my naivete about Formula One. I'm saying that I've been watching for several years, so it's not like I'm a complete noob. But it kind of, something has always sat a little weird with me when it comes to these teams, because the power unit, which seems like it's a highly critical part of the vehicle, right? The engine, there's only a few actual power unit suppliers. So I got to thinking, I was like, what if everybody had to create their own power unit? Would that make it a more interesting sport? So that you didn't have like three cars out there running a Ferrari, three running a Mercedes, and a couple of Hondas. What are your thoughts about that? Is that just pie in the sky type? Oops, pie in the sky type talking, or am I also making it way too much about the power unit and less about the design of the chassis and the suspension and the aero and all that kind of stuff?
No, you're absolutely right. Um, looking at just Williams, they're running some of the parts from last year that Mercedes were running, right? So they're really a year behind, which is unfortunate. But at the same time, it's probably going to be cheaper than finding a new engine supplier or even creating their own engine, because you're going to have to create a facility for that, right? So, I mean, in a perfect world, I would love to see every single team have a different engine. Will that ever be realized? I don't think so.
Yeah, it's sort of a pie in the sky thing, but I really like, to me it's like, what, why can't we do this? Why can't they? It's really, they're constructors, they're supposed to be building a car. What's more important than the engine in a car? So anyway, that has always kind of been a little bit of a weird thing to me about this. And then I mean, there's other stuff that does bring a little bit of intrigue and drama into the sport. I remember when when Red Bull had been running, I think it was a Renault engine, right, for quite some time, and then they decided to switch from Renault and go to Honda, I think it was, and of course that became a huge problem for Renault because that's a lot of revenue and money, for them to keep going to sell their engines to Red Bull. So that piece of it actually does add a little bit of intrigue and drama that we could talk about. So I guess I sort of like that aspect of having everybody running somebody else's engine, but it's still kind of like, well, come on, man, let's build these engines. I'm very interested to see. I'm very interested to see Red Bull do their own works engine. I think that is very could add a lot of I don't know. I would I don't even know what to call it, but I want to see Red Bull run their 100% their own um, car. So that'll be interesting. I do want to go back to one thing though that you mentioned before, and it was about wind tunnel time, right? I don't fully understand the wind tunnel time. I mean, obviously, the wind tunnel is a huge deal for development of the car because you are you're getting to see how your aero setup works in those wind tunnels. But the thing that I specifically was wondering about is this new facility that Aston has is, um, it's got a wind tunnel there. But it seems to me that the wind tunnel time is determined by what you said before, the ranking at the end of the season. So what does it do for them to have their own wind tunnel if they're still restricted by the amount of time that they can test in a wind tunnel?
That's a really good question. I don't have the specifics on that. I'm gonna have to look that up and get back to you.
I somewhat wonder if one of the things that it helps them with is if they have a state of the art wind tunnel, they can they can lease it out to the other teams and have a source of revenue for other teams to come use their wind tunnel. That's kind of one of the guesses that I have about it, is that it makes sense there. It also seems like it clearly would cut down on the cost and logistical challenges of getting your car to a wind tunnel and testing it at somebody else's wind tunnel. So I'm sort of thinking that's what it was about, but it's and then the other thing is, how do they police that? If they have their own wind tunnel, does the FIA have cameras or inspectors wandering around the Aston facility to make sure that they're not going over their allotted amount of time? So those are some questions that came up for me with the whole Aston's wind tunnel thing.
No, that's a good question. I honestly have no idea. Uh, it'd be interesting to find out about that one, though.
As podcasters, we probably better do our research on that. Maybe we better put a note to follow up on Aston's wind tunnel and learn all about that, so we don't come on here and saying we're clueless. Sorry, man. I ambushed you with a question that
No,
we didn't
it's
know
all
the answer
good.
to.
That's how you learn, right?
Totally. Well, so with that, that was the bulk of the things I had jotted down to talk about. But I did, we focused a little bit on Williams. We focused a little bit on Hamilton. Was there anything else that stood out to you on uh, at the testing over the course of the last weekend?
Um, Not really. Um, everybody's kind of already within, a second of each other, at least compared by their fastest times. Maybe I'll stretch that out to 2 seconds. Everybody's within 2 seconds, which is sort of the norm, anyways. Looking at a race, and you compare their fastest times. Um, People that I thought would have done better. I thought Ollie Behrman would have done better, especially since he's been in, an F1 car before. But I I honestly expected more of him, and it just didn't work out. I don't know if he was, doing more recon work than anything. But out of all the new guys there, I thought he would have done a better job. Um, but other than that, everybody was sort of grouped together, at least team wise. I don't think anybody was super far above their teammate, except with Ocon and Behrman. But I don't know. What about you? Did anybody stand out to you, or that you thought they would do better?
I mean, that we already talked about it. I thought it was really cool that Carlos got that fastest time overall. That the Williams was the fastest in testing. Now, like I said, I'm trying to like not be overly excited about it, but I thought that was cool. I thought that meant something. And part of the reason why I think it meant something is I think last week we talked about this like kind of like killer instinct when you want to come out and just show that you are the guy. Um, it's like I'm going to show this in testing. I'm going to show this in practice. I'm going to go out and like I'm kind of hoping that that's what we were seeing from Carlos because I think he's a great driver and maybe he's coming out with something to prove. Another thing that I was noticing was looking at the timing sheet. It did seem like the rookies were down at the bottom of they were in the lower half of the times for testing, except for Kimi Antonelli was up closer towards the top. So, not sure what to make of that, other than well, mainly because we've said it a couple times on this podcast. You can't take a lot from the times, but there is something to be said, I think, for all the rookies being sort of in the lower half of the timesheet. So
Yeah. Well, to be fair, the majority of the rookies are in less than stellar cars, with the exception of Antonelli. So, and I think Gabriel Bortoleto was the only one that beat his teammate, Nico Hulkenberg, but it wasn't by much.
yeah, it looks like 4/10 maybe he beat
Yeah.
him. Yeah, Nico, a little surprising that he was down that far on the timetable, but again, he's in the Sauber and he's you know it's just testing. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Those are a couple things that stood out to me, I guess. Max in the Red Bull wasn't especially didn't do especially great, but didn't do bad. I couldn't really draw any conclusions about Red Bull, and I think you mentioned earlier that you thought they might be sandbagging a little bit. That I could see, um, but yeah, we'll see what happens. I'm real excited uh, for Australia, and I think what do we have 1 week, so we'll get to maybe preview the race next week and come in with our bold predictions about what we think is going to happen.
Yeah, that sounds good to me, man. I'm excited.
Well, cool. Yeah, it's can't believe it's picking up. I guess the other thing maybe that's coming out here soon is the Drive to Survive. So I don't know if you get to watch if you like watching that. It's sort of become a little bit comical because they like to play up the drama all the time on that show, but it is a good way to get excited about the season too. So I'll probably be binging
Definitely.
that once it drops, which I think is coming soon.
Yeah, sounds
So
good, man. I'm excited. I'm really excited for the upcoming season. Testing is a great teaser. A lot to look forward to. I'm excited to see what these teams do and how they change things as the season progresses. So,
yeah, agreed.
all right, man.
All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next week's episode.
Yeah, see you later, man.
Adios.